Hello, everyone. I'm so excited today to bring Maria Robertson Justiniano to my show today. Maria is a professor turned mental health advocate, and her story is so powerful, and I can't wait to share it with you today. Hello, Maria. Thank you so much.
Hi, Kathy. It's nice to be here, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's totally my honor, and Maria is also a friend. And I am just delighted to share your story with the world, as I know you are starting to do.
Well, thank you for honoring my story.
You are doing a documentary about something that was massively tragic in your life, and you are going public with it. Can you share with us what prompted you to bring this documentary to the world?
Oh, wow. I mean, it wasn't instantaneous. I can certainly tell you that. Since Alex passed, I mean, the first year was a complete blur, but I've actively worked on processing the trauma and the grief. I've looked at it, I can say, every single day. And I think that, part of that process was also reading other stories. And, I always knew this, but there's still so much stigma and taboo. And Alex was a person who was super compassionate and helped his fellow man. So I thought, that I've been thinking about these years about, what can I do to honor Alex? And I think the greatest honor for Alex would be that his story could help someone.
Yes.
That's my motivation.
Just so that our listeners understand what happened. So 5 years ago, your husband, who was an economist with the Federal Reserve, unfortunately took his own life.
Yeah, I can't go into many details. I don't talk about that day. I don't talk about the details of the way that he took his life. I pick up the story after, it's a survivor's story too. This is a story that speaks to survivors. Oftentimes, when a family member is sick and when a family member is mentally ill, the focus is often on the person who is sick, and the caretakers kind of recede to the margins. And afterwards, I also speak to what happens after, right? This is a story about helping people who are in the process, who are going through it, but also speaking to those after, because I think for myself, I didn't have a lot of guidance. I, frantically looked for kind of stories that were similar to help me through. And there's a lot of silence.
Yes. And in fact, that's why I wanted you on the podcast, because you had this really tragic thing happen to you and your son. And not only did you deal with it, during Alex's struggle, you had to deal with the aftermath of it, but you have really transformed your life into not denying your grief, but transformed it into meaning and purpose, and have also created a life of joy.
Thank you for saying that. I guess I wouldn't understand it if I didn't go through it myself, but there's a few people that I follow on Instagram and that have gone through tragic events. And I think that there's kind of a misconception about grief, because you can grieve. In my case, I mean, I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but in my case, I have been, grieving Alex and the loss of Alex for the last 5 years. I mean, it's not something that I ever think that I'm going to get over, but I have moved forward. Yes. I've moved forward in my life. And, I remember saying really early on to Lucas that we are going to honor your dad by having the best possible life that we can have, because we didn't choose his demise. We didn't choose this ending for him, but we can certainly choose the way that we live our life and how we are going to honor him. And I think the best way to honor Alex is to live a full life and to be happy. He wouldn't want us to be stuck in that place, of the first few months afterwards, or even the first year. It doesn't mean if I have a joyful life today that I don't miss him. I miss Alex every single day. there's going to be that empty space in my life forever. But it's like Lucas and I have always said, it's like we get two lives. And in a way, that's lucky. How lucky are we to have lived a beautiful life with Alex? We lost him in a terrible way, but we remember, those beautiful times that we had with him, and we honor him by now living a joyous life.
So beautiful. And your joyous life includes today. I mean, you're not only doing this documentary, but you were living in Chicago. You moved to Valencia, Spain, where you are right now. And also you're in a new relationship and your son is also thriving. Is that all fair to say?
Absolutely. The move to Valencia, my family, my mom's from Valencia, and I've always had Valencia has always been my refuge. I've come to Valencia in different stages in my life, different times in my life where I've had difficulties, and I've come here as my refuge. And I always thought that it would be after Lucas finished high school, but he asked me to come too, because he felt safe and protected here. We have a lot of family here. I think, the impulse also was we couldn't move forward. We can't move forward in a space where that happened. Everything was a reminder for us,
right?
Going by the train station where I used to pick Alex up. And it doesn't mean I'm not naive. I know that you can move away from a place and take all of that with you. Mm-hmm. I get that. But we came here because this is a place that we feel held and protected. And it was very symbolic to start over here. And yes, I have a new relationship, different from my marriage to Alex. Alex and I were super traditional. We were married for 20 years. I think I learned a lot about love in the last 5 years. And this new relationship has taught me a lot about, how to love in a different way than how I loved Alex. And I think I've also learned to love Alex in a different way.
Beautiful.
He's still there.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who has experienced a tragic event and are grieving? What helped you move through it?
That's a great question. There's not one definitive thing that helped me. There were several things. And I think initially, when something like what happened to Lucas and I, something so tragic and so, it was a shock. I think initially you're kind of just, we were in shock and, we needed a lot of help. When I thought about the, process of actually moving through this grief and this trauma, I have a friend who does a lot of meditation. So I phoned this friend. He had a tragic event in his life. And I knew that if anybody was going to get me through these days, the first few days, it was going to be him. So I phoned him and I told him what happened. And he told me to go find a tree. And I said, okay, I'm going to repeat. But he wanted me, to get out of my house and get my body moving, because I think, to be stuck in that place symbolically also is not a good place to be. And it's so easy to kind of get pulled down into that vortex of sadness and being overwhelmed. And that's okay too, because, those first few weeks are chaotic. And a lot of it I can't even describe, Kathy, because I don't remember. Part of my mind shut off. Because it was so painful. It was so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But so he told me to go find a tree, and you can go and find this tree because it's close to your house. So I would walk every single day. He said, I want you to walk to this tree and then I want you to phone me. So what he was doing, he was offering me support by, I was doing this for him too, right? He was getting me out of the house. He was making me walk to this tree. It was fantastic. I'm convinced that he kept me alive. He kept me moving forward. So he taught me over several months how to meditate.
Nice. And I think also what it sounds like he taught you as well, which I think is so important for all of us, right, is when we have big emotions like grief or like sadness, they have to move through us. That's how we process them. And quite often, I know for me, it is doing something physical as well. So it sounds like doing the meditation, getting support really helped you move through this really tragic event and shocking event, by the way. I mean, this was not something that you foresaw coming.
It was shocking. And I think, what you said about having it move through the physicality of that grief and trauma is really important for people to understand, because if you don't allow that to move through your body, if you don't kind of exercise that out in whatever way that happens, whether it be, I boxed after too. Like it was my process of the grief was a very physical response. I lifted weights, I ran. I hate running, by the way. I still do it and I still hate running. And I know that it's like my mental thing. People react in all sorts of ways, but I knew instinctively that if I didn't force myself to look at this, if I didn't physically allow this to move through me, it would stay there. And I was scared that it was going to have a detrimental effect on my health, and that I wouldn't be able to move forward in any sort of way. I mean, it was really symbolic for me, this whole walking towards the tree, that movement of one foot in front of the other, was that we're going to have to continue. We cannot die with Alex. That's not an option. And I had at that time an 11-year-old son. No one was coming to save me. No one was, my friends were all around me and they were keeping me alive by you were there too, Kathy. People were delivering meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 2 months. My friends physically kept me alive because I don't think I could have possibly gone to the supermarket. That's how bad I was. But at some point, it's like when you break your leg and you're using crutches, initially that's what you have, this great support, but at some point you have to get rid of those crutches and take that cast off. That's not a solution for the rest of your life. And you have to learn how to do that. So the physicality of it, of moving through the grief, I think it's really, really important.
Do you know the name for our listeners, the name of the type of meditation he taught you?
It's Qigong meditation. Like my friend was a master in it. So it's not something that I could have just picked up.
Got it.
But there's also a lot of work being done on tapping. I don't know whether you've heard of tapping.
Sure, I've done it. Yes.
And he taught me tapping, and that also helps a lot. And you don't necessarily, like, I meditate all the time now. I meditate, just using your breath. And the beautiful thing about meditation is that you don't need a gym subscription. You don't need to leave your house, or just walking. I still walk. Walking is, and it's walking, swimming. These are all kind of types of meditation for me too. You're using your breath, you're moving through those emotions. But at that time, having him guide me was super instrumental in getting through those first really hard months of trauma.
Do you think the fact that you really allowed yourself to grieve every day and still do you think that has helped your process of finding a life of purpose and joy right now?
Absolutely. And after that, we had the pandemic. I don't think if I didn't do that work, because it's work, grieving is work. There's no sort of handbook on how you should grieve. I think that it's super personal and intimate. My grief was active. And I never expected that I was going to, grieve in that way. But I think that really looking at it, because whatever we push aside will come back. I believe this, and I've seen it in family members who choose not to look at hard things. It back in the form of something unhealthy, whether it's addiction or impulsive, buying or whatever. Having grown up with a bipolar brother and been through trauma as a child, I think that I knew a little bit about what trauma was. And I had already started that work from, childhood trauma. So I really was super active. And I truly believe that, Kathy. I think that without that work that I put in and still put in, this is not like okay, I'm done. I'm not done. I don't think I will ever be done. And that's okay too. This grief has evolved. It's evolved, and it's actually, I was listening another podcast the other day. They were talking about grief as, this tiger in the room, and it'll always be there. It's how you relate to it that changes,
Right. So, given the fact that you grew up with a brother with significant mental health issues, and then your husband suffered some mental health issues, what is your message to the world with this documentary?
Wow. I think the main reason is to educate people and to break the silence about, about mental health. I think that there's still so much stigma and taboo, and yet the statistics are alarming. Children from 10 to 16, it's the second reason of mortality in the States and here too. In Spain.
Suicide is
Suicide,
not mental health, suicide.
No,
Correct.
suicide. And the same thing is, like what we talked about, moving through grief, the same thing for mental health. Ignoring signs, ignoring mental health issues will not make it go away. You have to do the work. And there are solutions. There are other things that we pay attention to and we put funding into, but for some reason, and it baffles me because a lot of people at some point in their life will suffer from depression, anxiety, some sort of mental health challenge.
Correct.
And yet we're unwilling to talk about it or to put our funding. The solution in the States often, you see people who are on the streets, people who have challenges and are on the streets and who are homeless. Many of them, suffer from mental illness.
Right. And
we have to do better as a society.
1 out of every 5 people or 4 people at some point will suffer a mental health crisis as an adult, which means pretty much everybody we know at some point, whether it's in your family or a friend, everyone we know will have some sort of mental health crisis. I think the other staggering statistic is that 75% of all mental health issues start before the age of 14.
Think about the work that hasn't been done. Like you can genetically inherit trauma, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That can be passed down. So that's fascinating to me. So then it means that even more as a parent, when you're going to have children, you really need to look at that stuff. You need to do the work so you don't pass it on.
Do you feel like when Alex was suffering through this crisis that there was shame on your part or his part? I know you can't speak for him, that he was struggling.
No, I didn't talk about it with my friends when he was hospitalized because he asked me not to. So I respected his wishes, but I was never ashamed of what
Fantastic.
Yeah, no.
I think there are many people who are. So that was great you weren't. Did you feel you got sufficient support while it was happening with him?
I was in therapy. So my therapist, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I could have gone through that without having the support of my therapist. I didn't have the support of my friend group because Alex asked me not to tell anybody, because we had, as a couple, we had friends in common, and so I respected his wishes. I didn't want to betray his trust. I wish I could have told. I would have, if he didn't specifically ask me to not say anything, I would have told friends what was happening.
Sure.
But I respected that, and I felt that that I couldn't betray him in that moment.
Alex was such an incredibly smart person, and certainly his contributions to economics was amazing. Such a kind man. Was he ashamed, did you feel, of his struggle when he was going through it?
His struggle was so acute at that time, and there was a lot of change of medications. I don't think that he was fully able to understand what was going on. There was such a chemical imbalance provoked. He was unstable chemically unstable. He wasn't working with his full capacity. He was limited by these medications.
Got it.
That's the sad part. Like, I think he just wanted to get better. Perhaps there was shame because he didn't want me to tell anybody, but I don't even know. We didn't even discuss it. It was so quick. It was so overwhelming. He suffered from generalized anxiety, but not anxiety that was debilitating, that he couldn't do his work. He was, giving conferences all over the world, and he never had anything that was so debilitating that he couldn't, do his work at a high level. So that was also the confusing bit about that month before he died. He just it wasn't Alex.
I think you told me before when we chatted about our interview that you would recommend to others who are suffering from mental health issues to get a second opinion.
Absolutely. I think we have this idea in our culture, in many cases, rightfully so, that we make doctors into these gods that will solve all of our problems. And thankfully we have modern medicine. I'm not saying to go against modern medicine, but I think that it's really important to get as much support and as many opinions as you can when you're going through this, because doctors are human and fallible like everybody else. And to have more opinions about it, and if you can get a second opinion and someone who can look at it, sometimes they'll see things that maybe perhaps, the other doctor who's so in it can't see. So I would recommend absolutely getting a second opinion.
Just to sum up for our listeners too. So somebody who's facing a traumatic mental health crisis, you would recommend what 3 main tips?
First of all, it depends if that person, if you're on your own, if you're married, if it's your child, there are all certain scenarios. So in my case, it was my husband. What I did right away was ask Alex to sign a form at the hospital giving me a medical power of attorney. Because when someone is in that state, it's very hard for them, as brilliant as Alex was, but he was in an altered state because of medication, because of, his condition at that time. He was in a major depression provoked by a change of medication. So it's really important that someone is supporting that person that has the ability to make decisions about their care. So oftentimes when a patient is admitted, and this has happened many times with my brother, and it's very frustrating, if it's your child and they're of legal age, you as a parent have no right to know anything about their care. Although when they're ready to release that person, oh, well, it's your child, you should take care. They're not willing to give you any information about their care. And then you're supposed to pick up the pieces, but you haven't been informed, right? So having that power to go in there and talk to the doctor and advocate, the most important thing is have someone advocate, because the person who's ill is not functioning at their full level. They can't advocate for themselves sometimes. They don't even know what they need. So I think that's really important.
So getting a power of attorney, again, for somebody, when you have a loved one suffering a mental health crisis, that's number one. What would be a couple other tips that you think would be really helpful?
So there are groups, you mentioned NAMI. There are groups in the hospital. I went to visit Alex every single day, and they have groups that you can go to these groups, and, that people go and their family members who are suffering and just need some, you need to support and advocate for the patient, but also take care of yourself. Because if you're not, it's like, that thing, and people repeat this all the time, but I truly think it's true. When you're on the airplane, they're like, first put your mask on. Well, you need to take care of yourself, because if you're not eating and sleeping and, doing the mental work that you need, then you're depleting yourself of all of that strength. You absolutely need to stay strong and take care of yourself. And, being with other people who are going through a similar situation as yourself, and having, someone else to sort of commiserate with truly helps. in that situation. It's something that I regret not doing. I didn't do it. I was like, because I was so confused. I was like, how did we get here? I mean, it was so surprising to me where we were with Alex, and so unexpected. That part of it I didn't handle very well. I think that I could have done something more for myself at that point. So, and asking family members to come and help you.
Okay.
With childcare, with meals. I was working full time, and my in-laws came and they helped me, with the logistics of my household. Because all of a sudden, my partner, who was there, and we were doing these things together, all of a sudden, Alex was not there. And I had to, figure out what was going on with Alex, do my job, take care of my son. And so asking for help. But if you don't say, I need you to come and do my laundry, for example, or I need you to come, and you have to be specific, not just, people are like, how can I help? Or, then be specific about what you need done.
Yes.
Those things will help you to be able to take care of the person that needs your time and your care.
Right. So being real specific to others who reach out and say, how can I help you? And just say something like, you know what, dinner would be great, or getting my laundry done would be great. Just being real specific. And as somebody who's offered help, as we all have, I think that's really helpful, because when people offer help, they want to give help. They want to do something. So it's powerful if the person can be specific.
Yeah.
You really went from not really talking about what happened to now doing a documentary on this whole course of events. How did you find the confidence and the mission really to do this?
So that, that was part of my grief, working through my grief, because, the obituary makes no mention of how Alex died. And obituaries are, and I wrote that in a fog of absolute despair. I needed to write one. And I go back now and I think, and I read it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, people write these long obituaries about the person and their accomplishments. And I was in such a state of affair. I was actually really angry when I wrote that, because I didn't want to write an obituary for my husband. I wasn't ready to write that. I wasn't ready to face that, celebrate his accomplishments. I wanted him to be here, so, but I had to do something, and I wasn't going to talk about how he died. There's this website, it's called Young Economists. And, initially when it happened, they were all wondering, like, people were like, did he have a heart attack? Was he sick?
How old was Alex when he died?
Alex was 44.
Yeah. So young.
He was very young. Yeah.
And initially when this all happened and the tragedy happened, and actually for quite some time after that, you didn't speak about what happened. And now you're doing a documentary, really coming forth and talking about it. And certainly you now talk about it in social media, and you are really using your voice. What helped you start using your voice and creating really meaning and purpose out of this tragedy?
That is like such a powerful question, Kathy. And I thank you for asking me that question, because, initially, the first thing that I wanted to do was just go and hide, because I didn't want to have to face what happened. I think my first reaction was, I don't want this. This is not our story. Well, I don't like the story. I don't
denial, right? We're in denial.
Complete denial. But yet I had to face it, because I had to prepare a funeral for my 44-year-old husband. And I had to write an obituary. And Alex was Catholic and a practicing Catholic. And so I remember I was working at Loyola at the time, and I'm, my friend and colleague, he performed the mass, Alex's mass. And he was, he knew Alex. So we're all sitting around the table at St. Athanasius. And we're talking about the music, and I'm looking at my in-laws, and I'm looking around the table. I'm like, this is absurd. Like, what the hell are we doing? Like, I didn't want to talk about it. And I certainly didn't want to write an obituary that said that he took his life. I just wanted to kind of cocoon in my house. And now I think that I should have. Family members didn't want that out there. There was a lot of, let's not say how he died. We don't want that to be, and then eventually it did come out. But, when something so horrible happens, you react, your first reactions, those are your first reactions. But I think that as I've processed this and looked at it, and I've realized now that the only way to help is to break this silence. We cannot, as a society, because in my mind, if I stay silent, then I'm an accomplice in some sort of way. I'm complicit because I'm not helping by staying silent. But if Alex's story in some sort of way, and this is my motivation, I've thought about this a lot. And, going public about Alex's suicide is not an easy thing. But I truly believe that if Alex's story is told, and his story helps someone else, then it's worth it. Because I don't want someone to suffer in silence, whether it be someone who's going through something similar or a family member who is now faced with this horrible tragedy and doesn't know what to do. My motivation is to educate people and to help in some sort of way and to break the silence and the taboo and the stigma. The more we talk about it, the more we realize that there's so many people that suffer.
Right. And just simply knowing you're not alone, I think is such a powerful thing. I know any kind of tragedy or grief that I've gone through, finding others who have gone through something similar and just knowing that it's happened to them too, it just makes it better.
And it's so amazing that since I've been so vocal about this, how many people have come to me and said, I have a family member who took their life, or I myself attempted suicide. Since I've been in Spain, 8.
Wow.
8 suicides of close family members.
Very sad, but amazing that it's so prevalent.
Yeah. A lot of people, I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she told me about 4 suicides of friends and families in her life. 4.
Wow.
Those numbers are staggering. We have to change. We have to do better. I think that being more open and public about mental health issues will save lives. I truly believe that.
Because do you think it will help others seek treatment, not be ashamed, get the help they need to move through it?
Yeah, all of the above, and have people who have been there, who have had difficult moments in their life and have suggestions because medication is one way. I don't believe it's the only way. I do believe there are certain mental illnesses where that are chemical, bipolar. For example, my brother has taken lithium and it has helped him. I mean, he can no longer take it because after many years, it becomes ineffective, or your organs can't take it anymore. You have to do other things also to help yourself. And I think talking about it and having people who have been successful with certain treatments, not only medication, it really helps,
Right.
I think that it's key, because if you don't reach out and talk about it and you're just trying to do this alone, I don't think that's the best way to deal with mental health issues at all. Suffering in silence will certainly get you to a bad place.
Right. David Kessler, who has written about grief and worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, talks about not only the 5 stages of grief, but the 6th is finding meaning. Not finding meaning that the tragedy happened, but finding meaning after. And that is what really helps them. I don't want to summarize his work, but the way I understand it is what really helps them process the grief is finding the meaning and purpose after it. Do you think doing what you're doing now, coming public and doing the documentary, has helped you process the grief better?
Absolutely. And I've thought about the 5 stages of grief. And I think that many people misinterpret the 5 stages of grief, and they think that it's like, this after the 5th, that's it. I don't think that's what she intended for that at all. Like it's, and I think the meaning, I think the 6th, adding to that. And I truly think it helps you deal with that, that emptiness that's left. I read something about grief is, the love that you have with that person, but the lack of expression. You can't express it to that person because I've always, the grief for me, grief has always been palpable. I've, tangible. I've thought of grief in that, what is it about when someone dies that's so hard? And it's the physical part. And because the essence of that person, you can find the essence. Alex, for me, and I'm not particularly religious, like I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So, and I wish in some sort of way I were more, because I think that it helps to sort of place all of that somewhere. But Alex, I think his energy is still here, right? He's transformed in some sort of way. And so the meaning piece, finding meaning is placing all of that love, have a physical person there anymore, right? So the meaning gives you a palpable thing to hang on to. And I think it's really important to have a place where you can express yourself in some sort of way. It converts that love that you would have given to that person, transforms into a meaningful life. And it's a way, you having a meaningful life. And this is how I interpret it. This is my experience, and like I said to you before, everyone will have a different experience with their own grief. And I think that's why it's important to do your own work and process that grief. But for me, having a meaningful life and making meaning out of this very horrible tragedy is an important part of honoring Alex. Mm-hmm. And the gift of Alex, I think
and it also seems like, tell me where I'm wrong, but it also seems like having this meaning and channeling your love for this meaning has helped you also find more joy in your life.
Absolutely. My disposition is positive. That's not to say, and I don't want your listeners to think that I'm now living in Spain and I have this great fancy life and I'm doing this documentary, because there are moments still where I'm lying on my kitchen floor sobbing. And that's part of it. And sometimes I, out loud say to Alex, Alex, I'd really like you to be here right now to see how great we're doing. And you would really love Valencia, But also, thank you, Alex, for loving me so much. And now I'm here with Lucas.
Yeah.
And I have this great life. I mean, Lucas has said to me, we're really fortunate.
Yeah.
And it's, he's said that on many occasions. And part of me, inside, I've said to myself, oh my God, like, how can he say that when this horrible tragedy happened to us, right? But he's right. We are fortunate. And recognizing that we're fortunate and being grateful for the lives that we have and this joyous place where we are right now is also an expression of our love for Alex,
Well, and it's also an expression of you, Mama, for, I'm sure, modeling gratitude and joy every day.
Yeah. And I think, I had a colleague at Loyola, and I'm so thankful for her in my early days of grief. She took me aside and she went through a pretty bitter divorce. And she said to me, cry, get it all out. But remember, Lucas is watching. And so however you choose to move forward, you will be the model for your son. So in those very early days, when we laughed, because there was laughter. I mean, that's the thing that in my head, I couldn't figure out. My friend from Canada came, she just showed up and stayed. And this friend of mine, we've always laughed to the point of like crying. And we had laughter like that, and she saved me with that laughter. And I welcomed that laughter in those moments. It was a release, right?
Totally.
Joy is so important. I think people misinterpret, or maybe there's a confusion that if you just cry all the time, that you will be, and not move forward, you will be honoring that person more, right? I think we have to work through our prejudices that we have of grief and grieving family members and being a spouse who's left afterwards, because there's a lot of guilt associated with joy.
Right.
Do I have the right to feel joy at this point? And I had to work through that in my own head, in my, is it okay to feel this joy right now? And yes, absolutely, you deserve to feel that joy.
Well, and don't you think too, just American women in general don't celebrate joy enough. They don't allow themselves. I'm talking in general. There's many who do. It's like a cultural thing. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think as a woman, you're taught to suffer. You're taught, as a woman, as a wife, there's a message of that you should suffer in some sort of way. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
So what do you do today to create daily calm and joy for yourself? Are there any tips that you can give us that we could be inspired by?
So it's very simple. I wake up every day and I say, it's a little kind of mantra that I have. First, I say, thank you for Lucas, to the universe. Thank you for giving my son to me, because he has given me so much strength. And thank you for this breath. I think that my joy, it comes of me being grateful for my life, and there's no sort of grateful for material things or, I feel a lot of gratitude just living. And I think all of us have learned, I hope anyways, after the pandemic, I think that gratitude is a key to joy and happiness. I think we're taught, and especially in American society, of this, there's always this, like, when we get to a certain place, we're going to be happy. When we get that job, when we get that new car, when we get that house, when we get married, when we have a baby, oh no, when we have 2 babies and then we have to have a dog. There's always this sort of, when we get to that other place, we will feel happiness. We've been taught that, right? So we get on this machine of, we need to get more and we need to get that degree and then we'll feel. And what I've learned is to be still in this space and feel gratitude for where I am. This isn't an easy place that I didn't sort of happen by this. There were many hours of kind of pain and suffering to get to this realization. And I think where it became like a light bulb in my head is last year when I was stuck in Canada without a home. I'd sold my home in Wilmette. I was supposed to be in Spain in December. Actually, I was supposed to be in Switzerland in December. And I end up in my bedroom, in my family home, in the place that I started from 25 years ago. I'm like, is this a joke? And I was stuck. And I was like, okay, this is not where I imagined that I was going to be. But I'm very thankful to the universe for that, because I had to work out for 3 months. I had to look at myself and say, okay, I wanted to be at Spain in this time, and I wanted to be in that house that I was going to buy, but fell through. And I wanted all of these things, but I didn't get them. And now I'm here. So what do I do with that? And so I would go to bed at night and I would say to myself, I'm safe. Lucas is safe. We're with my parents, and I'm grateful for this spot where I am. As much as I didn't want to be there right now, because I wanted to be in Spain, not in -50 with, snow. But and I look back at that time It's almost a year ago. And I think that was a great, great time. We had a great time because we made the most of that situation. We were grateful for that situation. And I really look back on that time and I think, and at first I was like, oh God, how did I get here? This is not the plan. And I think, it's really important in life to, we have these ideas of where we're going to be. And I think we're kind of programmed to function that way, but to stop and in that moment, just feel grateful.
Right. So gratitude, I could not agree with you more. The more you find things to be grateful for, the more gratitude you'll have. And it does, there's all this research, right, that shows how it changes our brain, it changes our mood. And you're a living example of that, going through this tragedy and yet finding so much to be grateful for every day.
Absolutely.
What would you tell your younger self today?
Hold on. So I would tell my younger self, to have faith in your strength and who you are, and to never be afraid to speak up. I think that many times, and to really listen to your intuition. I think I was super insecure before. I think that Alex's death had given me a sort of rebirth and has shown me how important it is to use your voice and be firm and be strong and believe in yourself. So my younger self, I would say to her, believe in yourself, listen to that inner voice. We get so distracted by what other people think of us and by what other people expect of us, that we get lost, on our journey. I think listening to that inner voice and deep inside, what you want and what is right for you, but we get lost. So, yeah.
This whole process has helped you find your inner voice even more.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And what would your 95-year-old self tell you today?
She would probably say 85 or 90% of the things that you're worrying about today will not happen. Whatever you're imagining in your head as a problem, it's not going to happen.
I love that. That is the truth. Anything else?
She would be proud. She would be proud of how I handled things and my strength.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What would you tell somebody right now who's ready to share their story but feels afraid, but knows that their story could help others? What would you tell them today?
That's a great question. I think that only by, telling your story and saying it out loud are you able to transform, keeping it to not only transform yourself, but transform and help others. That by telling your story, you could very well be saving someone's life or changing their destiny, changing and that's really powerful. Stories are powerful. I've dedicated my life to literature. I was a literature professor. You start with the idea, but telling that story gives it potential to become a reality and to alter someone's reality. And that's powerful. Words are powerful. That's why we have to be so careful in social media. How we use our words. People forget that, and we've seen that in the last few years in politics. Words can convert into actions, whether they be well-meaning, good actions, powerful actions, or destructive. If you have a story that will, is transformative and can help and transform another person's life, why wouldn't you tell it?
And what if
Right.
they're afraid of what people are going to think or be judged? What would you tell them?
I don't have a definitive answer because it's one that I personally struggle with. But I think even if you're going to be judged, it's worth telling the story because, when we started this whole documentary, the idea of the documentary, I said, well, can we use an actress? And the filmmaker was like, well, it's a documentary. No, because I didn't want people to think that I was doing this to get attention, because that's the least of I am not someone that likes that type of attention. It's something that really to this day makes me feel insecure being on camera, but the motivation to help is stronger than my insecurity. But it's something that I have to even work out today. I mean, I'm doing this and I'm going, but I still have to, it's an ongoing process for me, working through those insecurities. It's not easy, but despite the difficulty, it's worth putting yourself out there, and you're transformed along the way.
So it sounds like, because I know for myself as well, like becoming more public or posting things, it's not real comfortable often for myself, but I remember, gosh, if this could help someone, if this could change them in some way, I remember that when I do it. And it sounds like you're doing something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So my motivation to help someone is stronger than my insecurities about how people will, interpret this. There's always going to be someone who's going to take your story and turn it into something negative. Well, then whether you choose to listen to that negativity or not, you absolutely have the power to either listen to that or just say that's their opinion,
And their projection. And quite often that negativity or whatever spin they want to put on it is about them and not about you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the truth. Yeah, absolutely.
So where can we tell our listeners when this documentary comes out and where to find it?
We're hoping that it's going to be available, on all sorts of platforms. We don't know yet about distributing the film. We will have, we'll show it here in Valencia first. And then, hopefully it'll be available on many platforms.
Exciting.
And when we know more, absolutely, I will, it will be, right now we have a webpage. It's www.alemaria.org /.
Okay. And how do you spell Ale Maria?
So it's ALEMARIA.org /. So all the information will be on that. And we're on Instagram at alemaria.docufilm. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, this has been so powerful and such a joy for me. And I just want to thank you so much. One day we'll do a retreat in Valencia with you.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. There's so many places here where you can find peace. Well, it's been voted #1 to retire in Europe, Valencia.
There you go. Sending you lots of love. Thank you so much. It's just been such an honor. And thank you for sharing your story and helping others.
Oh, thank you for having me on so I can tell my story. It's a powerful thing to be able to tell your own story.